No more shrieking, no more silence. Oh, no more chains around the mind. We survived, now it's our turn. Yeah, we're gonna rise higher. Turn the struggle into fire. Every setback made us strong. That's why we still move on. Yeah, we're gonna rise higher. Even when the nights get darker, living out the dreams they prayed, and we ain't fading no way. We're gonna rise higher. Gonna rise higher. You know, gonna rise higher. You know we're gonna rise higher and higher.
Alrighty, let's get started. Thank you, Love Loves Me, for tapping those hearts and saving the broadcast. Thank you so much. So that's our new podcast song called Rise Higher. Tell me if y'all like it by tapping the heart. Say yes, Rise Higher is that one, Dr. Sean, or hey, Dr. Sean. I don't know. Hopefully you're positive. So tonight is another night in our Hood to Hooded Historical Book Club series. We are diving deeper into the book you see on the screen. I'm not going to say it. You can kind of see it because they've been flagging me all night. I've been having hell trying to get this topic done, so we're going to do it. Tonight we continue a conversation most people have never heard growing up. Not because the documents didn't exist, not because the words were hidden, but because many people never opened the original sources for themselves. Yesterday, or the day before yesterday, we spent over 2 hours reading chapter 1 of Religious Instructions of the Ninos, I'm going to say it like that, in the United States. And what shook me the most was not emotion, it was how direct they are in these chapters. So, you know, the document openly connects religion, obedience, labor, and social order. This is not my opinion. This is not conspiracy. This is not a TikTok clip. This is a primary source. That's why tonight's reading really matters. Because when you read original documents, you can open your own eyes and then start to feel very different. These are the questions I want us to think about critically tonight. Was the faith you have always freely chosen? Again, this stream is for educational and historical discussion purposes only. Sometimes I gotta say this is for entertainment material and discussing it critically. Now, one thing from chapter 1 that stood out heavily to me was how the author connected Christianity and obedience. There were passages suggesting religious instruction would make enslaved people more patient under suffering. Are you patient while you suffering? You a Christian? Okay. More obedient under authority and useful to the system economically. I'm going to read that one more time. The passages that we read in chapter 1 suggested religious instructions would make enslaved people more patient under this dive in. Now, just a recap of chapter 1. Chapter 1 discussed how they frame religion as obedience, and they're written during a time of enslavement, where enslaving people was legal, which is basically trafficking and kidnapping people and genocide, all of that stuff that they just call slavery. Really, it was trafficking. Really, it was of this religion. They had to convert you and teach you how to do this and teach. You get me? So it also reflects on how reading old documents feels different from hearing the summary. So when you actually read it for yourself, it feels different than if I just say, hey, in this book, he was trying to say, no, in this book, this is what it actually says. So while we're going through this chapter, I want you to think about a couple of things critically. Number one, did schools ever teach these exact documents? 9 times out of 9, no. Okay. Number 2, what emotions come up for you while we read this text? Are you just like shocked, or are you like, I already knew that, or are you like, wow, I can't believe it, this is baffling? Think about how it makes you Think about how it makes you feel spiritually. Okay? Then I want you to think, can religion both help people spiritually and be weaponized institutionally? Think about that. So type in the chat, what is the biggest thing that shocked you from chapter 1, if you watched chapter 1 or heard chapter 1, or just from my summary. And if you watch this on the replay, let me know. So chapter 2, just to give you some history, the author was writing to the slave holders and religious communities. So they sent these instructions to the plantations and the religious communities so that they could convert the melanated indigenous people into Christians so they could be more obedient, follow the laws, the rules, everything. Because once you follow the 10 commandments, they said, you're going to follow all the other laws that they create for you. You couldn't read, but you could read the Bible, right? Many enslaved people were legally denied education. Think about that. But they gave you this instructions. They were legally denied freedom of movement unless you was going to the church. And they were not allowed to have self-determination. So they saw that the indigenous, our ancestors they had their own licensure, I keep getting this word, licentiousness. I can't pronounce the word. I'm not embarrassed. It's a crazy word. But it just basically means you have the free will and the freedom and the liberty to do whatever you desire, right? You had your Epicurean life where you weren't bound by any laws, by any people who thought that they were better than you and made laws to say that you were the least of their worries and that you were basically like chattel, right? So whenever we have these texts, I want us to separate what the document actually says, what the author believed, what actually happened historically, and how modern people interpret it today. That's how mature historical analysis work. So we are going to read, I'll pause. If there's any words that are difficult for us to understand, I will stop. And if you have a question while I'm reading, put it in the chat. So during this, our themes for commentary will be religion and power, literacy and knowledge, and spirituality versus institution. So if you want to read along, you can come on any of the other platforms, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram. But if not, you can just listen along on TikTok. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Make sure you are tapping those hearts. Tap, tap, tap. And let's dive in. I already read some of this earlier, so I got to redo it again, y'all. But it's okay. So chapter 2, the second period. From the first census, 1790 to 1820, a period of 30 years. So that's what chapter 2 is covering. From 1790 to 1820. So just think about this. 1790, this is when they first created the United States government. They had slave patrols, slave raiders. You know, even the first president enslaved over 300 people. Come on now. Even the first president enslaved over 300 people. He also inherited enslaved people, and he used slave raiders and things like that to capture people. So just think about the cruelty behind this government that we're discussing. But this is a time period. You can see what's going on and just see how this makes you feel if you were in the 1790s. And I thank y'all for tapping the hearts. Before I get started, if you watch it on any platform, make sure you like, share, tap those hearts, so that other people can find this podcast. And also, we are trying to get to 1,000 hearts on TikTok. I can't see the hearts until I finish, so I'll tell y'all how many we got. And normally we always meet our goal. Earlier we didn't because you couldn't hear me. But now you can. Alright. So 1790. Let's begin. The interest awakened in Virginia by the labors of President Davies continued throughout this period, as appears by the following letter from the Venerable Doctor of still appearing in Cub Creek Congregation in Charlotte County, Virginia. The minister of whom I allude was the Reverend, was so absent that on one occasion after preaching, finding the horse of another person hitched where he commonly left his own beast, He mounted and rode him without noticing the mistake. He was notoriously a man of prayer, for when he turned out the public road to go to the house where he usually lodged, the evening before he preached at Bribery, he could be heard aloud long before he was in sight. Sometimes he became so much enraged that his old bald horse would come up and stop at the gate whilst he was still in earnest supplication. This man judiciously turned much of his attention to this congregation was situated on the northern bank of Staunton River, where the land is very fertile. There were several large estates possessing many slaves within reach of the house of worship where he preached. Under the care of Mr. Cobb, Reverend W.S. Plummer's report. Dr. Alexander proceeds, many years after, that's how they knew that you were ready. Okay? It says, at Cub Creek I found about 70 black communicants, 24 of whom belonged to one estate. So these are enslaved people he's talking about. He said 24 of the people who were required to go to the church belonged to one estate. Now, let me put in a little footnote here. In chapter 1, they were talking about how they sent this sermon out from this preacher from England to about 10,000 plantations around the world, saying, hey, you need to instruct your enslaved people on how to be Christians because they'll be easier to control, and you got to control their religion and give them our religion because they're heathens, and they kept calling our ancestors poor creatures and things like that because we were not in the religion. So they were sending this book is based on and their attendance on the word preached as the whites. Some of them have been received in Mr. Henry's time, but others afterwards. The second found they performed their duties faithfully. This is the guy from Princeton saying this, saying that they would put a couple of us over the other ones and call them an overseer or a superintendent, and they performed their duties. So they would watch you. So in a lot of references, people mention how even in the church you had to have like a slave patrol, which is now like the police, at the church to make sure the leaders were preaching the sermons that they picked for them, right? It sounds crazy, but this is just how it started. Let's carry on. It was in the same county and very much to large colored congregation at Cub Creek that Dr. Rice labored on missions of the General Assembly. Appointed him for about 3 months in the year to labor among them. I know he was very much encouraged in his work, had some very promising young converts, and the number of communicants was not diminished in his time. The present pastor, a Baptist in Virginia. So it's saying the Baptists in Virginia, this is the first colony, right? It's saying that once they converted them, they became followers of the Baptists in Virginia. Eventually, we'll talk about how the Nenos start to branch off on their own from this because the colonizers seeing that, hey, they've been converted, we trust them to teach what we taught and be obedient. So they trusted them to go along. That's just me adding a little footnote. Let's carry on. In general, the Nenos were followers of the Baptists in Virginia. And after a while, as they permitted many colored men to preach, 1840, they started to permit many colored men to preach, because before you were not permitted to preach because you didn't know nothing about it, and you had to have their permission to preach. These guys here, the author of this book, colonizers, right? The great majority of them, the transition is happening. First it was all this right here, right? And then they permitted us to preach. So then a lot of us started going to listen to us preach versus their church because we were now obedient. Okay, and it said many these preachers who were colored, they had lots of attendance and they called it many evils. In some parts of the state, the Methodists also paid much attention to the Nenos and received many of them into their society. Thank you for the heart, me. But still, professors among the Baptists were far more. I was acquainted with the congregation at Cub Creek. I never knew one of them to leave their own communion for another. We had testimony, this part right here, let me just read. We had testimonies of their masters and mistresses to their consciousness, fidelity, and diligence. The lady who owned 25 of the communicants, talking about melanated people, selected all of her house servants from the number, though not herself a communicant in the Presbyterian Church. And on several estates, instead of overseers, some of these pious men were appointed to superintend the labor of other field servants. Did y'all hear that? Talking about owning people, making them go to church, but even the master didn't have to go to church, but they would force you to go. And if you were obedient, you could go and be a house servant because you were more following line. You hear that word servant, right? Churches in Greenville County, North Carolina, labored successfully among the Ninos about this time. So they called this laboring among us to get us to convert. The good effects of whose efforts continue to be felt for many years after Dr. Plummer's report of synods of North Carolina and Virginia. Okay? It's now we're into 1792. It says 1792. Towards the close of this year, the first colored Baptist church in the city of Savannah began to build a place of worship. The corporation of the city gave them a lot for the purpose. So the city gave them a lot to build a place of worship. When they banned you from owning land, they were seizing land, they were banning you reading, writing, traveling, doing all of this stuff. They had a ban, they were doing all of the genocides and things like that, but they gave them a lot to start a church. Just think about that. Why would they do that? If it was good for you, that you think that they were doing that because it's good for you, or were they trying to trick you out of your spot, erase your spirituality, give you religion so that you could be obedient? Let's just be real. Anywho, it said the origin of this church, the parent of several others, is briefly as follows. So they gave them this church in 1792. Now we're talking about the pastor. It says George Layell, sometimes called George Sharp, was born in Virginia about 1750. His master, sometime before the American War, removed and settled in Burke County, Georgia. So this guy came from Virginia, and his master moved after the American War, and they settled in Burke County, Georgia. Mr. Sharp was a Baptist and a deacon in a Baptist church of which Reverend Matthew Moore was a pastor. George was converted. See, he was converted and baptized under Mr. Moore's ministry. The church gave him liberty to preach. He began to labor with good success at different plantations. Come on now. Mr. Sharp gave him his freedom not long after he began to preach. For about 17, a city in the river, and baptized an African woman by the name of Kate, belonging to Mrs. Eunice Hogg and Andrew, his wife Hannah and Haggard, belonging to the venerable Mr. John Bryan. So you see the plantation owners, the government, all we got to get our just, we don't know the history. So when you don't read, you are forever going to be enslaved. Even if you think you're free and you believing in something good, sometimes it's just not what you think it is. Okay? It says the Baptist cause among the Negroes in Jamaica owes its origin to the indefatigable and pious labors of the worthy man George Layell. So if you got Baptist church in Jamaica, it stems from this guy who came from Turtle Island. Designed to introduce preaching in King of 450 communicants. Think about this. The government, United States government, but the colonizers formed officially 1790. George Washington had 300 plus enslaved people. So this is around the time they allowed him to start converting people before they even had a government. They were converting the indigenous people. Okay? So when they talk about converting, killing the Indians, 150 communicants from Jamaica, and commenced the erection of a commodious meeting house. It finally cost with steeple and bell 4,000. He was alive in 1810 and about 60 years of age. About 9 months after George Lely left Georgia, Andrew, surnamed Bryan, a good man of sense, great zeal, and some natural elocution, began to exhort his black brethren and friends. He and his followers were reprimanded and forbidden to engage further in religious preach. Later came back and said, you don't have permission to do any religious activities anymore, because they were doing something. Maybe they were taking them because they were. Hello, Dr. Sean. Hope your day was full of smiles. Random question. What is the most satisfying dental procedure to finish? Thanks for taking the time to read and answer my question. The most satisfying dental procedure for me is extractions. Okay. For whipped. For worshiping. What? You can't make this stuff up. Anywho, it said when publicly whipped and bleeding under his wounds, Andrew declared that he rejoiced not only to be whipped, but would freely suffer death for the cause of Jesus Christ. So you see how they taught them to. Did y'all see the conversion? That's crazy. It says, in that while he had life and opportunity, he would continue to preach Christ. He was faithful to his vow, and by patient continuance in well-doing, he put to silence and shamed his adversaries, and influential advocates and patrons were raised up for him. Liberty was given Andrew by the civil authority to continue his religious meetings under certain regulations. It says, his master gave him the use of his barn at Brampton, 3 miles from Savannah, where he preached for 2 years with little interruption. Not long after Andrew began his ministry, he was visited by Reverend Thomas Barton, who baptized 18 of his followers on the profession of their faith. The next visit was from the Reverend Abraham Marshall of Keokuk, who was accompanied by a young colored preacher by the name of Jesse Peter from the vicinity of Augusta. This is down my neck of the woods. They converting people, turning them into preachers so that they can convert other melanated indigenous people. It's crazy, man. On the 20th of January, 1788, Mr. Marshall ordained Andrew Bryan, baptized 40 of his hearers, and constituted them with others, 69 in number, a church of which Andrew was the pastor. Such was the origin of the first colored Baptist church in Savannah. Holcomb's letter, analytical report. Before dismissing this notice, I cannot forbear introducing the remark of Dr. Holcomb on Andrew Bryan, written in 1812. Now, 1812 should ring a bell. That's the year the Revolutionary War, when they were fighting with the crown and they weren't agreeing and they had war going on. They wanted the Seminole Wars, all of that going on. The indigenous people, our ancestors, fighting. So it says, quote, Andrew Bryan has long ago not only honorably obtained liberty, but a handsome estate. His fleecy and well-set locks have been bleached by 80 winters. Manly features of a jetty hue fills every person to whom he gracefully bows with pleasure and veneration by displaying in smiles even rows of natural teeth, white as ivory, and a pair of fine black eyes sparkling with intelligence, benevolence, and joy. In giving daily thanks to God for his mercies, my aged friend seldom forgets to mention the favorable change that has of late years appeared through the lower parts of Georgia as well as the South Carolina in the treatment of servants. How are you talking about God and his mercies and talking about the treatment of enslaved people? I mean, how y'all putting this all together? How is this making y'all feel? Because right now I'm just like, what the fuck? Anywho, 1793, the African church in Augusta, Georgia was gathered by the labors of Jesse Peter and was constituted this year by Reverend Abraham Marshall and David Tinsley. Jesse Peter was also called Jesse Golphin on account of his master's name, living 12 miles below Augusta. If you still asleep after me reading this, you just want to be asleep. You just want to be asleep, okay? It says the number of baptists in the United States this year was 73,471, allowing one fourth to be Negroes. The domination would embrace between 18 and 19,000. So basically, is this saying that they will only allow one fourth of the denomination to be Negroes? So, what? I'm so confused. So before you couldn't even be allowed into their congregation. Now everybody just go freely. You just flock to their religion freely. It's kind of crazy because I grew up in the church, so this is really shocking. Like, it's crazy. 1795, the return of colored members in the Methodist domination from 1791 to 1795, inclusive, were 12,884. Then it went to 13,000, 16,000, 13,000, and 12,000. So they was converting us, some of us not converting. Just think about that. The last mention was, quote, that Africans and Indians may help to fill the pure church of God. Ooh. This is on page 53. Clip this. What the hell? What the hell? I gotta take a sip of water on that. What? Wow. It said they needed to fill their church with black people and Indians. So if you don't think that you're Indians, then I don't know what you're thinking. This is what they're writing. You know, they're trying to mix all these words together, but you just gotta overstand and just, wow. Okay. What the hell? Anywho, it says, I'm gonna read it again. Clip this. Several annual conferences recommended a general fast to be held March 1796. And in the enumeration of blessings to be invoked, the last mention was these people who they had enslaved. They talking about the pure church of God. Are y'all kidding me? And the matters recommended as subjects of grateful remembrance in the day of Thanksgiving for the last Thursday in October 1796. And the last mention is, quote, and for African liberty, we feel grateful that many thousands of these poor people are free and pious. 1797, the Methodists reported in 1796 11,280 colored members. They keeping track of you. They already know what's going on. They keeping numbers, keeping stats on how many people are converting. The recapitulate, but see, we need you. Asioma need you. And it is as most interesting document one insert its entire so far as it relates to the Negroes. So it's saying it gave all of these numbers about the Methodist members. It says Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island 2, Connecticut 15, New York 238, New Jersey 127, Pennsylvania 198, Delaware 823, Maryland 5,106, Virginia 2,490, North Carolina 2,000, South Carolina 890, Georgia 148, Tennessee 42, Kentucky 57, making a total of 12,215. Nearly one-fourth of the whole number of members were colored. There were 3 only in Canada. So you thinking that this started with all of us being religious in some kind of way? It wasn't given to us. It was given to us. It was forced on us. We were converted. Converted, guys. Dr. Bangs adds, quote, it will be seen by the above enumeration that there were upward of 12,000 people of color attached to the Methodist Episcopal Church. These were chiefly in the southern states and had been gathered principally from the slave population. Wow. Clip that. At an early period of the Methodist member ministry in this country, you gotta be kidding me. They wanted to direct their attention and efforts towards these people who they call poor creatures in the last chapter. Thugs, savages. Meanwhile, they had them shackled. But they calling them a thug and saying God told them to be shackled. And saying we wanted to bring them the enjoyment of gospel blessings. How the hell you could talk about a gospel blessing while you taking my freedom away from me? How? This is when you get the theme of religion and power going together. Right? Do you think institutions sometimes use morally insane narratives to maintain power? That's what we see going on right here. Yeah. Eye-opening. The preachers deployed with the deepest sympathy their unhappy condition, especially their enslavement to sin and Satan. And while they labored unsuccessfully by all prudent means to effect their disenthrallment from their civil bondage, they were amply rewarded for their evangelical efforts to raise them from their moral degradation by seeing thousands of them happily converted to God. Hold on, I gotta read that. Directed its efforts towards these people, the Indians and the enslaved people that they had then trafficked, with a view to bring them to the enjoyment of gospel blessings. The preachers deployed with the deepest sympathy their unhappy condition to raise them from their moral degradation by seeing thousands of them happily converted to God. These efforts added much to the labor of the preachers, for such was the condition of slaves that they were not permitted on working days to attend public administration of the word in company with their master. And hence the preachers, our people, because they sent out a letter from England and said, hey, don't make them work 7 days, make Sunday, the day that they're supposed to not work, make this the day that they got to go to church. They said this from England. They sent it to all the plantations. So you wonder why you go to church on Sunday? Yeah. Do y'all hear the language? How does this make you feel? Them talking about preachers and their working days and being permitted. So the melanated preachers, they were not permitted on their working days to attend the public administration of the word in company with their master. On their working day, they couldn't talk about the word with their master. I found that very funny. You couldn't talk about the word that they gave you with your master except on Sunday because you had to work. Work was first. The reason why they actually had you going to church was so you could work more obediently during the week. I feel like that still applies to today. Some people still caught up in it today. Let's just be honest. They won't get uncaught, unenslaved in the mind until you read the original text. This is mind-blowing. It says, and although at first there was much aversion manifested by the masters towards these benevolent efforts to elevate the conditions of the slaves, yet witnessing the beneficial effects of the gospel upon their hearts and lives, they gradually yielded their prejudices and encouraged the preachers in their labors, assisted in providing housing to accommodate them in their worship, and otherwise protected them in their religious privileges. Fuck. Stay focused, Dr. Sean. Stay focused, because what you telling me is that at first the masters was against them, They just had to focus on work, but once they saw how beneficial the gospel was to their labor, they said, oh no, we got to treat these preachers good because they getting the other people to convert. I got to treat them special because this religious thing is very profitable for me. This makes them so obedient where they don't even fight me. Oh yeah, let's build a church right here. Let's build a church right there, anywhere these people are, put a church. Because they not going to know. They going to think this good because we have converted them. So generations down the line, that's why it's called a generational curse. Oh, this is not your ancestors' original spirituality. You don't even know this, but you just go along with the flow. I'm so happy that someone loved me enough to wake me up and scream it in my ear and say, hey, listen, you're indigenous to this land. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm so happy. Let's carry on. Let's continue their civil bond. The voice of truth addressed to the understandings and consciousness of the slaves themselves was often heard with believing and obedient hearts and made instrumental in their deliverance from the shackles of sin and bondage of Satan. Ooh, I can't believe, is this what I feel in my spirit? So you mean to tell me they wouldn't listen to them say, hey, I don't want you to traffic me and shackle me right here in my present real life. They said, oh no, they didn't listen to them about that. They said, we got to protect you from the shackles and the sins and the bondage of Satan. They didn't call themselves Satan. They called Satan somebody else. Your overseer, right? That's a deep, deep paragraph. I'm just trying to stay focused. I got to read it again, y'all. I got to read it again. Clip this. It says, while therefore the voice of the preachers was not heard, talking about the preachers have been converted and now they are allowed to do these things because the master saw the benefit of them being preachers, so they treated them a little bit special, gave them a worship house where they had, of course, the slave patrol there to make sure they was preaching. Remonstrances. What the hell? I never seen that before. Remonstrance. Remonstrance is a forceful, reproachful protest. Remonstrance. Never heard that before. It means disapproval, denunciation. Despite angry remonstrances from residents, the board had already confirmed the planners. So it means when they talked about believing and obedient hearts made instrumental in their deliverance of shackles, of sin. Even though we're not gonna act like you a human being, you 3/4 of human. Even though you know you're not privy to white supremacy, tricking you to think that's right. It said in some of the northern cities, houses of worship were erected for their special and separate accommodation. Love Loves Me said, false hope, facts. And they were put under the pastoral child. You had to have a white preacher, and then he had to raise up the melanated preacher, it said. And now we just do it with, they don't even have to, say nothing. Everybody just flop. Everybody just fall down. They just fell to the system. Not everybody. It's a couple of us woke out here, but it's not a lot. And people don't know that this is one of the main weapons. That's what I realized during my time of waking up. This is one of the main weapons. That's why this book is so important to read, so you can know the tricks that are being played upon your ancestors, that were played upon your ancestors, and how they have carried from generation to generation, secretly lying in the DNA. But right now, we break it. We break those chains. Focus on this in the church. Come on now. Anywho, let's keep going. This really shocked me. Clip this. In some of the northern cities, houses of worship were erected for their special and separate accommodation, and they were put under the pastoral charge of white preacher, who was generally assisted by such colored local preachers as may have been raised up among themselves. For many such from time to time, possessing gifts for edification, were licensed to preach the gospel set apart from the blacks. Their behavior has generally been as to ensure the confidence of their masters and the protection of their civil rulers, though they labored under the disabilities incident to a state of servitude. Now, you can have God, but we always gonna be somewhere over here in their head. 1799. The year is memorable for the commencement of that extraordinary awakening, which, taking its rise in Kentucky and spreading its various directions with different degrees of intensity, was denominated the Great Kentucky Revival. Wow. 1799, the Great Kentucky Revival. It continued for above 4 years, and its influence was felt over a large portion of the southern states. Presbyterian, Methodist, and Baptists participated in this work. In this revival originated camp meetings, which gave a new impulse to Methodism. From the best estimates, the number of Negroes received into different communions during this season must have been between 4 and 5,000. Convert more. All right, 1800. The number of members in connection with the Methodists is 13,452. To procure a recommendation from the preacher in charge and his colleague on the circuit to the office of local deacons. Richard Allen of Philadelphia out of the first 26 December 1802, and Henry Cunningham elected pastor and ordained to the work of the ministry January 1st, 1803. On the second day of January 1803, another church was formed out of the first, called the Ogeechee Colored Baptist Church. What? The Ogeechee Colored Baptist Church. What the hell? And Henry Francis appointed to supply it. Supply the church? Henry Cunningham was a slave but attained his freedom. He is still the pastor of the 2D African Church, far advanced in life, and from age unable to attend his sacred duties except to very limited extent. Wow. So they got enslaved people to become pastors to, it says, supply the church. What the hell? It says this guy, who was a melanated pastor, he still enjoys, as he always has enjoyed, the confidence, esteem of all classes of the community in which he has lived so long, so virtuously, and so usefully. The Methodist conferences, I'm still here, TikTok. It says the Methodist conferences reported 22,000. It says the Methodist in 94. So they tracking everyone who convert. They like keeping tabs. These people going in the church thinking they just getting baptized. They like, oh, got another one. We got another one. Got another one. Got him. That's what they're saying. While you converting, they like, yeah. They like, got him. Got him. That's what they like.
Got him.
That's what they saying. They got him.
Oh, hell no, man. What the?
What the? It says, in the report of the Congregation of the Moravian Brethren at Graceham, Maryland, for 1801, the Reverend Frederick Schlegel, under the date 1819, writes. So this is somebody writing in 1801, April 19, 1801. He says, quote, as a number of Negroes had for several Sundays successfully attended our divine worship, I collected 13 of them, and after a suitable address, prayed with them. They smile in your face all the time, want to take your place. Oh, backstabbers. They smiling in these people's face the whole time, want to take their place, converting them, and then going and recording it and saying, hey, I got some more of them.
What do you mean by that?
It says they were very devout and declared it to be their sincere desire to be truly converted. A few Sundays after Brother Brown, who preached the gospel of the Negroes on Staten Island, being here on a visit, preached to 30 Nenos, and after the sermon baptized 2 children. The transaction, they call it a transaction, made such an impression on 2 of the adult Nenos that they requested this rite might be immediately performed on them. They were, however, satisfied with the reason I assigned for deferring it until they had received further instruction in Christianity. Because, see, before you could get baptized, you had to get their instructions for being a Christian. They had to approve you to make sure that you weren't trying to rebel and to make sure that you were truly converted. Then you could get baptized if you believe and you trust in the colonizer's religion. Okay? It says, a very affecting scene took place at the close of the meeting. A Negro overseer who was present kneeled down with his people and in an impressive prayer thanked God for what their souls had enjoyed that day. The number of Negroes that attended increased almost every week. At their request, a regulation was made according to which separate meetings will be held with them at stated conversation on religious subjects. Some children and a few adults were in the sequel baptized. This was from History of the Church of the Brethren, Volume 1, page 292 to 293. 1805. An African church formed in Boston under the ministry of Thomas Paul, a colored man. Their house of worship was finished 1806. The lower story fitted for a schoolroom. 1806. The Baptist churches of South Carolina were 130 in 1806. The number of ministers jumped to 100. The number of communicants 10,500, which perhaps 3,500 were Nenos. So when we're talking about these churches, only 1/4 of them could be Nenos at this point. So, 1807. Hanover Presbytery, Virginia, addressed a circular street. Also, our colored communicants in the Baptist churches in Virginia this year, I sat down at 9,000. So they converting them, telling them that they're from Africa, making the church an African church. Everybody converting. These people are falling left and right. There were 199 colored communicants in 3 churches: St. Philip's, St. Michael's, Charleston, 120, 73, and Prince George's, Winyah, 6. The other reports do not distinguish between white and colored communicants. 1813. There were 40,000 Negroes connected with the Baptist denomination in the states of Pennsylvania, Delaware, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The historian remarks that among the African Baptists in the southern states, there are a multitude of preachers. And what it said about the preachers who preach on the plantations to the enslaved people about being saved and free. You see what questions they're asking? Dang. Shouldn't the baptism on the promise of the master be administered to the children of the slaves? It's saying, shouldn't we baptize the children of the slaves? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
Oh, hell no, man. What the?
Oh, hell no. What the fuck? What the? This is 1816, they said it. And now they're trying to baptize the children. It says, number 1. He had a question. So his question is, clip this. This is a pastor. Hold on. It said, this is a report adopted by the General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church in the United States. Okay? Quote, ought baptism on the promise of the master to be administered to the children of slaves? Question mark, end quote. As follows. Number 1, that it is the duty of masters who are members of the church to present the children of parents in servitude to the ordinance of baptism, provided they are in a situation to train them up in the nurture and abomination of the Lord, thus securing them rich advantages which the gospel promises. Don't make no damn sense. Ain't no riches and advantages to you talking about somebody being in bondage and servitude. Baptizing them ain't gonna erase that. Number two, he said, that it is the duty of Christian ministers to inculcate this doctrine and to baptize all children when presented to them by their masters. Minutes of the Assembly. The subjects of the missions to the Negroes occupied the attention of the General Assembly, but no plan of missions was carried into effect. The missions to the Negroes. Yeah. Dr. Rice of Virginia was employed by the Committee on the Missions in the Assembly for a part of the year, and his labors were encouraging, and as already stated by Dr. Alexander in his letter, as appears from the minutes of the Assembly, page 342. The Colonization Society was formed this year, and I noticed it as furnishing an index to the feelings of many in relation to the improvement of the Negro race. The Methodists reported this year 42,304 colored members, and a decrease of 883 since 1815. Dr. Bain says, quote, this was owing to the defecation among the colored people in the city of Philadelphia, by which upwards of 1,000 in that city withdrew from our church and set up for themselves with Richard Allen, a colored local preacher, an elder in the Methodist Episcopal Church at their head. By habits of industry and economy, though born a slave in one of the southern states, he had not procured his freedom, but acquired considerable wealth, and since had exercised the office of a preacher and an elder, obtained great influence over his brethren in the church. At the secession, they organized themselves into an independent body and have a church. Y'all better wake up. At the first General Conference in April 1816, Richard Allen was elected bishop. At the conference in 1828, Morris Brown was elected joint superintendent with Allen. And on the death of Allen, 1836, Edward Waters was elected joint superintendent with Brown. The colored congregations in New York City followed by example. They adopted the itinerant mode of preaching and have spread themselves in different parts of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware. So it's starting to spread. So by the 1800s, a lot of our ancestors were being converted at a faster rate. So this meant that now they didn't have to have this colored preacher. They had a lot of these colored preachers doing the conversion. So this means that more of us would trust the preachers who look like us. So they started to really separate the church, where you got white, and even under slavery, they felt like this was something that we could have our own space. We could talk on our own. You know what I mean? So it evolved into something else, which we cannot deny, but it did not start with a great beginning. All right? It said they adopted the itinerant mode of preaching and have spread themselves in different parts of Pennsylvania, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Delaware. There are also some in the western states and a few in upper Canada now, because remember, it was only like 2 or 3 in Canada at the beginning of the chapter. In the more southern states, the Allenites could make no favorable impression, as their preachers were not recognized by the laws of the states. So in the South, the preachers were not recognized by the law. They were still chattel, basically. It said, and the slave population who were members of our church had the character of our white ministry pledged as a guarantee for their good behavior. What? And the slave population who were members of our church had the character of our white ministry pledged as a guarantee of their good behavior. You were obedient. That's bananas.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
Anywho, 1818. Under the report of colored members for this year, the same writer remarks that while there was an increase of white members amounting to 9,035, there was a decrease of 4,261 of the colored members. He stated that this was owing to the Allenite secession. Although not all who, through its influence, declared themselves independent, attached themselves to the Allenites. What the hell is the Allenite? Hold on, y'all. I don't know what the Allenite is. I gotta know what it is. Allenites. Disciples of Henry Allen of Nova Scotia, who began to propagate his doctrine in the country 1780. So another colonizer religion, basically, the Allenites. Okay. It says 1819. The increase of colored members this year was but 24. 1819 they had 39,174, and then in 1818 it was 39,150. Counted 1819 of a committee of the board of managers of the Bible Society of Charleston, South Carolina, respecting the progress and present state of religion in South Carolina, will cast some light on the subject before us. It says in quarter of domestic missionaries devoted and supported by each denomination who dispense their labors to such of the people as remain destitute of an established ministry. From actual returns and cautious estimates where such returns have not been obtained, it appears that in the state there are about 46. State the proportion of such communicants may be estimated at about 1/8. In every church, they are freely admitted to attend the divine service. In most of the churches, distinct accommodations are provided for them, and the clergy in general make it a part of their pastoral care to devote frequent and stated seasons for the religious instructions of catechumen from amongst the black population. What the heck is catechumen? What? You can't make this stuff up. I'm just really in shock. Catechumen, a Christian convert under instruction before baptism, a young Christian preparing for confirmation. So that's what that word means. It says catechumen, or catechumene, CATECHUMEN, a Christian convert, somebody who has been converted to Christianity before their baptism is called a catechumen. Wow. So it says, I'll read the sentence again now that we know what it means. In every church, they are freely admitted to attend divine services, talking about the melanated people. In most of the churches, distinct accommodations are provided for them, and the clergy in general make it a part of their pastoral care to devote frequent and stated seasons of religious instructions of catechumen from among the black population. And, you know, when you hear about how they had the enslaved people chained at the bottom of the church while they were preaching or in a special section, those are the special accommodations they're talking about. Right? It's sad because they're trying to combine religion while they're doing the most evilest thing in the world, trafficking. Psychopaths. It may be proper to state in connection with this report that from the beginning, with scarcely an exception, the Negroes applying for admission into the churches have been under the instruction of white ministers and members. So you had to be under a white minister or member to even apply to. It says they have been examined and approved as candidates for baptism, have been baptized and have partaken of the Lord's Supper at the same time with white candidates and members, and have been subject to the same care and discipline. No distinction being made between two classes of members in respect to the privileges and disciplines of the church. The Episcopal Church reported in part the number of colored members from 1812 to 1818, the majority in Charleston. The highest number reported was in 1817, was 18,000. In 1818, there were 289. Let's see. We're almost done with this chapter, actually. Woo, this is a lot in this chapter, y'all. This is a lot. A lot. Definitely touched on our themes for today: religion and power, literacy and knowledge, spirituality and institution. Like, this is crazy. If you're enjoying these historical readings and discussions, make sure you follow the page, share the live. Let me know what books, primary documents we should read next. But I got a whole bunch of them that I want to read. This series is about reading not reading the documents directly. Hold on. This series is about reading the documents directly, not reacting emotionally first. So we're reading and thinking critically second. So that's very, very powerful. We're going to get into some deep reflection questions in a second once I finish these last 2 pages. So it says, 1820 Bishop the census of 1800 gave us 893,041 Negro slaves and 110,555 free, making a total of 1,003,596 from the census of 1800. This is 10 years after the census first started. It said that of 1810 was 1.191 and wonders that show my ancestors were inhabitants. From this exact time period, they were farmers and inhabitants, not enslaved. It says the traffic was abolished by Virginia 1778 and by Pennsylvania. The traffic, you hear that word? The trafficking was abolished by Virginia 1778, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island 1780, 1787, and 1788. And before the year 1820, measures were taken by all the present free states, and basically it's saying even the free ones got to be instructed. How are we doing this? It says, I have no means of ascertaining with accuracy. From the best information in my possession, special efforts were very few and very limited. So they noticed now in the 1820s, the ones who was breaking free and getting out of being kidnapped and all of the genocides, they weren't falling for the religion. So they say, hey, now we got to focus on the ones who free. So now we get into more how people just fall into it nowadays. It says, as a nation, we were scarcely reviving from the revolution and the excitement of the formation and establishment of our Constitution, when we were involved in a war with France, which, with its influences and what was worse, the infidelity and skepticism with our previous connection with the nation introduced among us most seriously affected the interests of religion, and the decline was perceptible in a greater or less degree over the whole Union. Not long after our troubles with England began, which resulted in a 4-year war, notwithstanding these interruptions, the Spirit of God was poured out largely in different parts of the country. Indeed, the first quarter of the 19th century witnessed a remarkable revival of the missionary spirit in the American as well as the English churches. Many societies were organized on large and liberal scale, in whose existence the world has reason to rejoice, for the spreading of the gospel both at home and abroad, as well as the circulation of the scriptures and auxiliary publications as by the living teacher. This spirit wrought in the hearts and ministers and people generally, and a new and mighty impulse was given to religion. In the South, it awakened many to see the spiritual necessities of the Negroes. Many ministers began to preach particularly and more faithfully to them in an attempt and to attempt a regular division of their time on the Sabbath between the whites and the blacks. Attempts were also made in some parts of the South to teach the Negroes letters so as to enable them to read the Word of God for themselves. These schools were short-lived, but the fact of their existence evidences that there was considerable interest felt in their religious instruction. Houses of public worship exclusively for the use of Negroes were erected in many of the chief towns. Oh my God. So you see where they had us, they knew we were indigenous, they were doing the census, they could track everything, they were just basically like stalkers. So they said, hey, in many of the chief towns, they put churches. Yeah, they put churches. People were like, why are so many churches in the hood? Now you know why there's so many churches in the hood. Now you know. It's not an accident. It's not because we just wanted a bunch of churches. It's because, oh, they'll give you the money for that. They'll help you get that. It's happening to me now. It says, many of these houses of public worship exclusively for the use by the Negro were erected in many of the chief towns, and they worshiped in them under the care of white or colored teachers being tracked. Yeah, they tracking us all the time. But back then, they did it, on paper and in these books they're passing to each other. They never expected, a Niji, a Mary Indian, to be able to go and read this book, or even want to sit and read it, because it requires a lot of attention, comprehension, and understanding, right? So it says, clip this, in numbers of white church spaces, hold on, let me start it over, clip this. All right, it says houses of public worship exclusively for the use of Negroes were erected in many of the chief towns, and they worshiped in them under the care of whites or colored teachers. In numbers of white churches, space was allowed for the accommodation of Negroes in the stand or pulpit for preaching. The Negroes would oftentimes be seen assembling for worship between services or in the afternoon. There were planters also who undertook to read and explain the scriptures and pray with their people. It is not too much to say that the religious and physical conditions of the Negroes were both improved during this period. Their increase was natural and regular, ranging every 10 years between 34 and 36%. What? Wow. It's saying they were better workers basically because they were Christians. That is crazy. Wow. It says, as the old stock from Africa died out the country, the grosser customs, the ignorance and paganism of Africa died with them. Their descendants, the country born, were better looking, more intelligent, more civilized, and more susceptible of religious impressions. Ooh, if you don't get nothing else from this chapter, listen to that. Now, you know you're not from Africa. This book is in the 1800s. By this time, they were trying to say, they were saying in the book, despotism in America, they would get these enslaved people, make them think they were from Africa, beat it into them. And now people thought they were from Africa. But we already were here. We were already here. Right? Here before them. Already here. So it says their descendants, because pay attention. The country-born men were now better looking, more intelligent, more civilized, and more susceptible of religious impressions. So if you're more susceptible to religious impressions, then you pretty much been brainwashed, bamboozled from all of these years of them converting our ancestors, using our ancestors to convert other people. You fell a victim to the system. Growing up under the eyes and the families of owners, they became more attached to them, were identified in their households, and accompanied them to church. Wow. So deep. It said so deep. It said the servants, having no religion to renounce, grew up in the belief of their masters. That is bananas. On the whole, however, but a minority of the Negroes, in that a small one attended regularly the house of God. In taking them as a class, their religious instructions was extensively and most seriously neglected. Hold on, I didn't get that. It said, on the whole, however, but a minority of the Negroes, and that a small one attended regularly the house of God. And taking them as a class, their religious instructions was extensively and most seriously neglected. So it's saying a lot of them neglected their religious instructions. And that is the end of chapter 2. Right? So that's the second period that we just read, and we saw how we got from them trying to convert to now they have melanated preachers. They have these churches now. They're doing more reporting. They went from about, a couple hundred to now they have thousands of people converted across the country. And it's more like a machine now. It's actually a system. So that was chapter 2. I learned a lot in chapter 2. I know that was a lot. Thank you, Love Loves Me, for tapping them hearts. You've been rocking with me this whole chapter through me, talking in silence the whole time. So I definitely thank you for, being in the house tonight. And if you still think that even after chapter 2 that, church and religion was something that was given to us because it was good, this is what I gotta say to you.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
Okay? I'm gonna need a lot of these people to wake up and just
stop the cap.
Okay? And once we continue reading this book, we're gonna read chapter 3 tomorrow. I gotta see how long it is, but once we read it, I need a lot of us to be like,
bye, Felicia.
Bye, Felicia. Okay? Don't let nobody try to trick you into believing things just because it's what they was born into. Because remember what this last paragraph said, and I think this is something that we really need to clip. This is very important with this last section. The reflection questions that I have for us tonight is, number 1, why do primary sources matter, such as this book? Why do they matter? Because it's not me saying it. It's not somebody right now in this time period saying it. It's not the pastors right now who have been caught up in this for generations saying it. This is from a time when they were intentionally trying to convert people to Christians, and they wrote like the people from the Canary Islands. He said all these things. He said that they don't know religion. He said that they would be easy to convert. These are things that I just remember him saying. I was like, what? That was the beginning of my journey as a dental historian, I guess you could say. What other reflective questions do we have for this chapter? What are some historical topics emotionally charged from this chapter? So what I got from it is that, whatever your masters gave you or gave the people back then, they kind of had no choice but to do it. And even though they didn't hear their voices, like if they converted someone to be Christian and then that person followed and was obedient and they said, hey, you're going to be free, now you can teach all the other ones. Now we trust someone who looks like us more. It's kind of like dentists. People are going to trust me more if I look like them. It's the same thing with religion. Once they realized they could train up someone to go in and convert the others, they knew that this was the golden ticket to them. Like what? It made them be okay with suffering and being chained up because it was protecting them from Satan, not knowing that Satan was the one holding them hostage. Right? So these are some of the topics that get me emotionally charged when I think about it from this chapter. The next question is, how does historical knowledge affect identity? How does historical knowledge affect? This was forced conversion. This wasn't like, oh, hey, I like that religion. Let me have a free choice and do it. No, this was forced to be able to control the people. And it was forced from the crown all the way back a long time ago. They sent out thousands of people over there in America, basically. This is their religious instructions, and whatever you do, you got to convert them. So if you don't know history, then you allow the enemy to tell you who you are. You allow the enemy to tell you, hey, this is the religion. If you don't listen to me, then I'm going to unalive you, or I'm going to harass you, beat you, torture you, because you're not being obedient to your master here on earth, because the master that we have told me that we're over you. Doesn't make sense. I'm just saying this is how they think. So that's why knowing your identity or knowing historical knowledge does affect your identity, because there's no way, if you're a Christian and you read this book and you're melanated, once you read books like this, there's no way you stay in that mindset. You're at least going to be like, dang, start wondering and doing your own research. Because I can have somebody tell me something all day, I'm still going to go and read it for myself. So that way, when anybody tell me something all day, I'm still going to go and read it for myself. So that way, when the enemy try to tell me who I am, listen, you don't have a license to tell me who I am. Because when you did have an opportunity to talk to me and talk to my ancestors, you the whole time was trying to be conniving and trick them out of their spot. So why would I believe anything you say now, when everything in the past shows me that you never wanted me to be prosperous? Even now, they voting to erase the votes all over the country, but this has been going on. This is nothing new. So you know they don't give you nothing good, but they're going to force religion. This is one of their main weapons. It's not metal. It's a psychological weapon. And 99% of us have fallen for this weapon. We've been born into it. Like you said, we have to get the children into the religion. We got to baptize the children. Because once their ancestors die, the children get amnesia about where they come from. They get amnesia about their spirituality. And they knew this. That's why all of this is studying us. Why are you studying us and our religion? Why? Because it's all about control. The next reflective question is, why do people become uncomfortable discussing systems of power? They become uncomfortable because it goes against everything you was born into, everything that your grandparents taught you, everything that they talk about right now. I've been there, done that, been a completely holy person, like completely all in, until I got new knowledge, and I was like, what the hell? Now I just can't stop getting the knowledge, because now the knowledge, you wonder who's gonna read 300 pages? Not many people. Dr. Sean will, though. I will, because I like knowledge. I don't want to be. Knowledge makes you unfit to be a slave. I would never forget that quote. So yeah, I'm unfit to be a slave. I'm so unfit, right? It says, the next question is, how do institutions shape belief systems over generations? So you'll see in this chapter, there was a guy from Princeton who was talking about this. So all of these prestigious universities, they were all involved with this. So a lot of these institutions shape the belief system over generations, just like the government has shaped our community's belief system. It made us feel like it's okay to be harassed by the police. It's okay to be overlooked. It's okay. Everything's okay if we do things wrong to you, because God told us that it's okay. You know, don't make no sense. So sometimes history is uncomfortable, not because it's false, but because it forces people to rethink what they thought they already knew and understood. So you might be thinking, dang, I understood history and religion, but I now know I don't understand shit. They've been lying to me this whole time. So to the audience, now that we are at the end of this section, this is a Q&A. Just let me know what stood out to you the most in the chat, even if you watch it on the replay. What stood out to you the most, right? What lines that I talked about shocked you the most? Let me know, should schools teach more primary documents versus McGraw-Hill, who is going to whitewash it and not put the truth in it? This is why they don't read these primary texts, because honestly it's embarrassing. Second of all, the way they tie religion and politics together is very truth-telling. And you get to see the character of your enemy, because they studied us. So now we go back and study this stuff. You studied us, and now we study you. And I think that's it for my discussion. So we don't have any questions in the chat. I'm gonna wrap it up in a second, and we're gonna see how many hearts we tap. I see y'all tapping the hearts. Love loves me, Keck. Let's see. Love loves me, Keck. Jizzle. What's going on, y'all? No questions in the chat. Little bit more. Thank you for liking the live. So as we end this, tonight was very heavy, and so will the next couple chapters be very heavy. So if you want to continue this journey with me, make sure you are tapped in and following or subscribe. I appreciate everybody who came through tonight respectfully. If you listen, just got some new information. Whether you agree with every interpretation that I made or not, the important thing is that we're reading, we are thinking, we are questioning, and we are learning. And that is what truly matters. So tomorrow we will continue this journey in our series, one chapter at a time, one conversation at a time, one stream at a time. And honestly, I think that's how knowledge compounds. Like, the more knowledge we get, the more we learn, the more we read, your brain just opens up. So much love to everybody in the live tonight. Remember, guys, to protect your peace, protect your mind, keep reading, and keep growing. I will see you guys tomorrow. Bye. Thank you for teaching, teacher. Thank you. All right, before I go, let's see how many hearts we got tonight. Oh my God, we broke a record. 25.5 something. Let's see. That was so nice of you guys to just tap so many hearts. I really appreciate it. Yeah, tonight was a bit heavy, but we gotta do it. Let's see what this one sounds like. Play. Hello. Hello. Yay, I love you guys. All right. This is Dr. Cheetah Sunflower signing off. Good night.